and then launched Wayflyer in March 2020. And now it's about 300 employees, probably over 100 million we'll do this year.
It's not usually a straight line, there's up and down. But what was your fundraising journey?
I would encourage you not to take money from people who are not seasoned angel investors. If you pick the wrong investors, they can kill your company. In the early days, it's actually the most stressful because it's very binary. It's like, do we have enough money to pay salaries and rent at the end of the month? But as you get bigger, the job actually gets way harder because there's so many more aspects of a business that you need to think about.
What was the darkest moment for you?
And they said, look, we really like the company, but we're just not writing any checks right now. And we're like, uh-oh, because we're about to launch. So what I would say with Wayflyer is the probability is that if and when we do exit, it will be through an IPO because you get to a certain size and the odds of it being a transaction just fall away. But I think I like my job more than anyone else I know. So I'll keep doing it until they tell me I can't do it anymore. I don't want to do another job.
Aidan, thanks a million for saying yes to being a guest on our Leaders in Tech podcast. It's a pleasure to see you.
No problem, Neil. Great to be here.
Take us back, will you, to your roots. Give us a bit of a snapshot of the earlier years growing up. Where are you from?
Cork. So yeah, I grew up in Bishopstown, which is one of the suburbs just outside Cork City. Pretty idyllic childhood. Lots of GAA, lots of tennis, lots of soccer, lots of football. Single-sex primary, single-sex secondary, single-sex third level pretty much because I did electrical engineering in UCC. And then came up to Dublin at 22 and unfortunately never moved back. I don't think I'll be going back to Cork anytime soon.
This is home.
One of the few. Yeah,
settled.
Exactly.
Okay. And give us a sense then, because you obviously went electrical engineering route, but then did you tap in quite early to this kind of entrepreneurial flame?
Not at all. The opposite, actually. Yeah, the opposite. So I was really interested in politics at the time, and the summer of my final year in university, I went to DC and interned in Washington, DC for the summer, came back and said, I want nothing to do with engineering. I'm going to go work in politics. And actually ended up working in the civil service for about 18 months. Then realized there were some negatives to the civil service along with the positives, and ended up working in the private sector with McKinsey as a consultant. And then I went to work with an investment firm for a while. And then I moved to London to do an MBA in 2011. And that was the start of the entrepreneurial journey. So I didn't know I wanted to be an entrepreneur until I moved to London and had the time to think about what I wanted to do next.
Yeah.
And that's where I started.
And what was that like, that course and that MBA in London Business School? Was that I'm just trying to imagine the people and maybe the different people you met, because it's quite well known.
It was really, it was a great MBA. There was a lot of diversity. So within my working group, there was 6 of us. There was a Chinese woman, there was an Indian, Israeli, Canadian, Peruvian, and an Italian. So, that sounds like the start of a joke, but you actually had phenomenal exposure to lots of different types of personalities and nationalities. But it's actually not the place to go if you want to be an entrepreneur. So when I did the MBA, you take on lots of fees, you take on lots of costs because you're not working and you're living in London. I didn't want to be an entrepreneur when I did the MBA. I only discovered it during the MBA. And that's not great timing because then you come out of the MBA, you want to be an entrepreneur, but you have all these fees to pay off. So if you're going to be an entrepreneur, I wouldn't go do an MBA. If you want to do an MBA, you should go do it and go to London because it was really good fun.
And then So you had fees to pay, but you wanted to be an entrepreneur. What happened next?
So the second year of the MBA, moved back to Dublin with my wife, who was with me in London at the time, lower rent, started doing some consulting on the side for companies who wanted a former management consultant. And I was then programming the first startup, Kubicle, out of my bedroom for about the first year and a half. And that was just building the first product, then began to sell it, took on a co-founder, Alex, who ran Kubicle with me, and that was the start of the journey. So there was no VC money.
What did they do? Tell us about.
So what Kubicle does is it's doing really well today. It's got a really great CEO. He might actually be in this building. Mark Henderson is his name. It does data analytics training and digital literacy training for large corporates. So if you join Deloitte or Qantas or Daimler, lots of really great companies, Kubicle does a lot of the training for those businesses. And it's all online, it's all async, and it's a great profitable business, and it's been a great journey.
When you touched on something there, it wasn't reliant on venture funding; it was funded
all bootstrapped, all bootstrapped. Okay. Very different to what's happened subsequently.
Okay, so let's go there then, straight on then, right? Yeah, Conjura So there.
So Kubicle was inching along probably from about 2013 to about 2016. And it was growing steadily, but I didn't see that exponential growth that I had been reading about in TechCrunch and all the other magazines. So came up with another idea. Alex was running the Kubicle at this stage, so I set up another business called Conjura with my colleague Frank Wheelty. And Conjura provides e-commerce analytics to merchants who have a real data challenge. So the data challenge in e-commerce is really, really strong. So we built a tool that takes all the data in from your store, your ad campaigns, maybe your accounting systems, your inventory systems, brings it all together, cleans it, joins it, formats it, and gives it to you in a location where you have a single source of truth for how your business works. And that's Conjura. So Conjura's raised 2 or 3 rounds of funding. It's got customers all over the world, and Fran's running that today.
Because of that, is that where the idea for Wayflyer kind of?
Yeah. So we were working away in Conjura. Things were going really well, and my co-founder Wayflyer came and met us and said, "Hey, this is a great technology, but I'm not sure this is the best use case for it. Instead of selling a SaaS subscription to customers for analytics, you should use it to underwrite them for short-term finance, because e-commerce merchants have a huge problem with working capital, and this tool that you've built helps you evaluate performance and helps you underwrite those customers more effectively than banks would, for example." So we thought that was a great idea and wanted to keep 2 horses in the race. So we created a new company, and I moved across to the new company with Jack and about 7 others. And Fran ran Conjura, and the 2 companies kind of kept running together from, I think, September 2019 is when we created the new company, and then launched Wayflyer in March 2020.
Okay. So right now, bring us up to the now, right? For
now. So now is about 300 employees. Our revenue is kind of trending this year, probably over 100 million we'll do this year in our 4th year. We're present in Australia, Spain, Germany, Netherlands, UK, Scandinavia, but the biggest market for us is North America. It's about 70% of our business. And still scaling really well, and good fun.
And you then, I want to go straight into fundraising, because there's been some obviously pretty dramatic headlines over the years, right? And I'm always kind of
big rounds,
right? And different types of funding then as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's lots of entrepreneurs and people that would listen or view our podcast that have ambition and on that journey of fundraising. Take us back a little bit, right? Because I remember meeting you before. I think you were flying over to New York. You were busy, right? You were telling the story, getting out there in front of lots of different types of funders. What was that journey like? And take us back a little bit. Like, what was that actually like? Because there's different kind of paths within that, right? And it's not usually a straight line. There's up and down. But what was your fundraising journey, and what can you share?
So I was on a previous podcast maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, and I said you should always take the money if you can fundraise. And that got a bit of blowback here and there, but I still actually stand by it, because if you don't take the money, and money might be just enough for you to work on it full time, because most people can't take a year or 2 years off just to build a product without having any income coming in. And they end up doing what I did in Kubicle, which was consulting on the side and then programming at night. And that's really challenging, because when you're consulting to bring in some money and then at the same time building a product, the consulting gets priority because you got to put food on the table. So anything you can do just to pay yourself a salary so that you can get by and you can actually go for it, even raising that amount gets you going. And the way I always think about fundraising is it's a bit like producing a film. If you're producing a small indie documentary, you might only need a small amount of money. You might need 500,000 or something like that, but you need a small amount of money. If you're producing the Avengers, you need a couple of 100 million, and that's okay. So when you're launching your startup, you got to ask yourself, am I an indie documentary or am I the Avengers? And in the case of Kubicle, it was more an indie documentary, and in the case of Wayflyer, it was the Avengers. So when you think about fundraising, you have to ask yourself, what are you trying to produce? And sometimes you don't need a lot of money, and that's great. And sometimes you do need a lot of money, and you just need to tell the story that allows you to access that money. But ultimately, a small bit of money is really, really helpful because it stops you from diverting your focus away from the core product. And that just means you're going to move a lot faster, you're going to launch faster, you're going to learn faster, and you're going to enjoy it a bit more as well, because you're not going to be looking for the same consulting project around the corner just to keep the lights on. And it's stressful enough to do it without having a little bit of a backstop of money. So I think if you can do it at all, it's really worth taking on a small amount so you can actually focus on the product full time rather than spending your time splitting it between consulting and working on a product. There are other reasons to take on money too, but that would be the main one, at least initially.
Is there a big difference in raising money in different locations?
Yeah, valuation. So you raise from an Irish seed round or an Irish VC, you're going to get a lower valuation than if you go to Europe, and you're probably going to get a higher valuation in the US than you will in Europe. Now, that difference between Europe and the US has come down a lot because a lot of the US funds have moved into Europe over the last 10 years, but typically the big difference is valuation and size. So smaller countries have smaller funds, they give you smaller checks, you tend to get smaller valuations. So you can raise anywhere, but it definitely varies. The great thing post-COVID is that US funds and European funds will easily invest anywhere. So during COVID, there was no pressure, hey, you got to go to Sand Hill Road in California, or you need to go to London or New York. That was all gone. Everyone was taking calls from anywhere. So today, nobody thinks anything of investing 50 or 100 million in an Irish company. Whereas in the past, they might have said, actually, you need to be a C Corp in the US or something like that. All those barriers are gone. So today, we don't actually need a thriving seed community in Dublin. We don't actually need a thriving angel community because you can just access the UK, you can access the US, and they're more than happy to invest in Irish businesses. So COVID's been amazing for startups, and it's really leveled the playing field.
So how much have you raised?
All in, I think about 230 million. Not all at once.
I want to get into your character a little bit here, right? Because being overworked, like you always seem quite a calm demeanor since I met you at first, 2019, I think, when I first met you. But like, does that kind of, like that pressure, like does it never really kind of phase you? Like the expectation that, like statistically, like a lot of CEOs or entrepreneurs in certain size businesses or certain types of businesses, and then when you get to that kind of level, sometimes it doesn't always work out, right? There's different types of skill sets and that kind of stuff. And I'm just curious about you as a character and how you've kind of been able to remain calm. And
I'm not sure I have remained calm, to be honest.
Good.
I hide it really well.
Well, yeah, yes. Well,
I think it changes dramatically as you scale. So in the early days, it's actually the most stressful because it's very binary. It's like, do we have enough money to pay salaries and rent at the end of the month? So the early days are by far the most stressful because it's very binary. It's life and death, and there are so many ways in which you can get killed. As you scale, it gets less stressful from that perspective. So I don't check the bank account every week to see how we're doing. I know how much runway we have. I know financing, planning, budgeting, etc. So it gets less stressful from that perspective. But as you get bigger, the job actually gets way harder because there's so many more aspects of a business that you need to think about. And you're no longer in a speedboat with 4 or 5 people, which you can turn and change direction very quickly. You're actually steering a ship of 300 or 400 people. That's actually way more challenging. There's way more components to it. There's way more networks. There's way more relationships. There's way more locations. It's a much harder management challenge. So while today I consider it less stressful, but it's actually a harder job. Whereas at the beginning, it is challenging, but it's incredibly stressful because it's every day you get punched in the face or you're elated, and it's life and death because you may not get through it.
So that spikiness, though, right? That ability to manage one's emotions with that. Yeah, it's obviously never a straight line. Like if you were to reflect back, what was the darkest moment for you? Like negative. I'm just trying to be real, right?
I think we were doing a fundraise in early March 2020, and we flew to the US. I met with a really great VC, met with their investment committee, got through it. They were flying to Dublin to do their due diligence on us, flew over. That was the last flight that they took because then COVID kicked in and they said, look, we really like the company, but we're just not writing any checks right now. And we're like, uh-oh, because we're about to launch. And we provide finance to companies. We need money. So that was a pretty dark moment because it nearly killed us. And we had a few of those kind of moments, but that was a pretty difficult one. But yeah, we had to go through a pretty sizable layoff at the end of 2022. That was really challenging. But like you get punched in the face every week. You just get used to taking it. And I think that's the main thing about being in a startup. You always get punched in the face. Something comes along and it's more likely to be bad news than good news. Sometimes you get surprised with good news. Normally, because you're an entrepreneur and you're optimistic, you've already priced the good news into your week already. So it's only the bad stuff that hits you from out of the blue.
Okay. But then the ability to have that resilience.
Yeah, but I think you just get through that over time because you get through something once, you find it difficult. The next time around it happens, you're like, okay, I've been through this before, I'll do it again.
And speaking of like getting punched in the face, like and trying to, well, not that you should always try to keep people happy, but when you do raise significant amounts of money and then other people with vested interest in your organization, like to manage investor expectations, and particularly when it's not a straight line, it's never a straight line in a business.
No.
Bits and pieces, and we've had other headwinds, had other different pieces come at us that's obviously impacted the e-commerce industry in general.
Yeah.
What have you learned about how to navigate that effectively, or is it always changing?
So with investors, it is like a marriage, but there's no divorce. So you actually have to take picking your investors very seriously. So if you pick the wrong investors, and I've seen this happen, thankfully it hasn't happened to me, but it's happened to friends of mine, they can kill your company. And or in other cases, just create a whole host of additional stress. And it's a pretty stressful job as it is. So when you're picking your investors, the best thing to do is just to diligence them, and diligence them with companies ideally that they've invested in, that they've sat on the board on, and the companies have failed. Because if you talk to a company who's failed with one of your investors on the board, you get a much better handle on how they react when things don't go as planned. Experienced investors always know things are not going to go as planned. So, for example, if one of your angel investors is a doctor and he's made 3 angel investments in his life, and you tell him that his €50,000 is now gone, he's going to be shocked. If you have a very experienced angel investor who knows the space really well and he makes 15 to 20 investments a year, you call him up and say, actually, things aren't going as planned. I think we might have to shut it down. He's going to be, okay, let me know when you're going to go again. So I would encourage you not to take money from people who are not seasoned angel investors because they don't understand the risk that they're taking. They almost never have a diversified portfolio. And so it's a huge deal to them when it doesn't work out. That's not the case for more experienced angels because they know they're going to help you more. You're not going to have to educate them. And when things go south, they're going to be okay about it. So having more experienced investors and ones that you can diligence, they all know that it's going to go sideways and it's going to go up and it's going to go down. And most of their companies have been through what they call a whiffio moment, which is where fucked it's over. You can only go through a couple of those. If you've experienced investors, they're going to know that that's the case.
But to challenge it, you did say earlier on, you did say in that previous podcast, you mentioned that take money, but do you mean just like if you don't have the choice and loads of people queuing up to give you money, like is it as you kind of go through the more mature rounds, it's just...
So I think you should always take a small amount.
Yeah. It's just getting it off on...
To shoot the film, yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Take worst case scenario, take a small round of 100 or 200K. Maybe you can... That means that you have maybe 2 years of runway yourself, plus maybe you might be able to hire one other person. That might mean that you go 3 times faster than you would otherwise. I learned to code at night during the MBA so I could build a product, and I'm a very bad programmer. That is not the way to do it. I would have been way better off finding a really good programmer that teamed up with me, but I just said, no, I'll just learn it to do it because I want to do it myself. And that cost me years. So I would always encourage you, take on a small bit of money from more experienced investors, and you'll get to market faster. You'll figure out whether you're barking up the right tree or not, and it's going to be a less stressful life. And it's pretty stressful as it is.
Do you share any... I mean, you mentioned some of the redundancies and some of the difficult times, right? But they're necessary, usually, in most organizations that have global ambition and they're in multiple markets, and that's cyclical. Is there any other real, difficult decisions that you've had to make as a CEO and how you kind of navigated that?
I mean, unfortunately, your job as a CEO is to make difficult decisions. I think I said it to one of my colleagues last year, and it was a particular period of time where I said, I think my performance as a CEO is directly correlated to the number of difficult decisions I'm willing to make this week or this month.
Right.
Like, because most of the time, with the really challenging things that hang over you, they're only hanging over you because you don't want to make that decision. Not that it's intellectually challenging; it's more emotionally challenging.
Okay.
So as a CEO, you have to be a lot more dispassionate than I think you even realize at the very beginning. So when I think about difficult decisions that I have to make, I mean, I'm thinking about which one I have to make tomorrow. Because if you're not making the difficult decisions, you're not really doing the job. It took me a long while to learn that, but that's how I feel about it today. So I have a difficult decision to make tomorrow, and if I'm not making it, I'm not doing my job. So the difficult decisions don't really stop. And some are more difficult than others, but if you go through a week and you haven't made a difficult decision, you should be asking yourself, why not?
I'm really curious about motivation, right? Because you know, like success, we've had some good businesses, you know, it's not your first time, you know, being an entrepreneur, and you've had some, you know, you've had some good successes, right? It's good to acknowledge that. But like, you know, there's lots of fanfare, there's lots of, you know, fueling the ego. There's lots of things around you, right? And there's lots of big headline numbers and valuations and all that. Like, how do you actually stay grounded? Like, how do you, and then what, the follow-up question is like, what do you do to stay motivated? Because like doing that difficult stuff, it just seems relentless. Difficult decisions every day.
Yeah.
You know, you're on it, you know, like it just sounds very intense. And I'm just curious about you and what still drives it.
Probably two different questions. So to stay grounded, it's actually quite easy to stay grounded with a lot of these things, because you might sign a term sheet for an investment, and you know, or you might close a Series A or a Series B, and you're over the moon. I guarantee you, within 24 hours, something's going to come along and just whack you, and you're like, oh God, what's happened here? So like the ability for you to like stay delighted and on a high after raising a Series A or a Series B, something's going to come along in the business in the next 24 hours, and just you're like, crap. So you don't get the chance to like float in the clouds for longer than like 5 hours, I'd say, before something else comes along and hits you. So I don't know anybody who kind of floats along at that level, and they're kind of living off the fumes of having raised a big round and getting a lot of press, because like 15 things are going to come along in the meantime that take you out. What was the second part of your question?
It's more about keeping motivated than like,
oh yeah, I just love the job. Like there are periods where it's very, very difficult, but I think I like my job more than anyone else I know. So I'll keep doing it until they tell me I can't do it anymore. I don't want to do another job. I love it. Brilliant.
And what is the vision for Wayflyer? Like, do you think you know, like, would an IPO be on the cards? Do you think it's?
I think when you get to a certain size, you have to rule out M&A, because it may happen, but it's less likely to happen. Particularly with the current FTC in place in America at the moment, they don't seem to be in favor of any M&A at all. So once your valuation goes over $1 billion, you're probably in a situation where you're saying, I'm going to have to IPO at some stage as the default outcome. So what I would say with Wayflyer is the probability is if and when we do exit, it will be through an IPO, because you get to a certain size and the odds of it being a transaction just fall away.
Okay. When you look at Ireland, right, and building businesses in Ireland, I know you're global and you have teams all over the place. Like, has it been easy to build teams in Ireland? Is it just the same everywhere? You know, when you're trying to kind of build high-performing teams and look at talent, and like, I'm just from put your green underpants on for a moment, right? Like from an Irish context, like, what's the environment like to build a, you know, super ambitious, you know, obviously global ambition, you know,
so there's pros and cons, and I think overall Ireland is underperformed. So if you look at other small nations, kind of in the broader European area, like Sweden, Estonia, two countries for example, Israel, they're miles ahead of us in terms of the companies that they produce. Sweden and Israel in particular, like amazing companies, way more unicorns, way more startups, way more indigenous companies. So we've probably underperformed relative to companies we should be benchmarking ourselves against, which is fine. I mean, it's not a big deal, but just to set it out, I don't think we're doing well.
Okay.
As a default. The benefits of being in Ireland, the first benefit is I think it's much easier for us to expand into the US than it is for other countries, given our connections, particularly on the East Coast. It's very easy for Irish people to just gain a foothold on the East Coast, given our history there. We have the language, obviously, as well. And I think most of us have actually spent time in the US. And I'm making a big deal about the US because it's almost impossible to build a large business without having a presence in the US. So you're going to have to go there. I think we were there in month 2 after launch because we knew we had to go there from day one. The other benefit about Dublin in particular, but Ireland in general, is actually the sales talent. So you have all of the large technology companies are typically basing their sales on, or small to medium business sales teams in Dublin. And that means you have an amazing hotbed of talent for in-person sales. So if you have a B2B startup, amazing skill sets to scale your team in Dublin. So we were Spanish team or German team. They're all based in Dublin and they all work within our office because you have all those nationalities with a sales skill set. I don't know if you've that in any other city in Europe where you can basically scale a sales org with that concentration of talent in that city. We don't have the same, there's good engineering here, but we've had to go abroad to build out our team on that. I don't think you have it in product and marketing to the same extent. So a lot of our product and our marketing teams are actually, will probably be based in the UK. So our team's in London. It's more design, it's more product, there's a bit of engineering as well. So there are pros and cons. The challenge for Dublin, and I don't know if people talk about this, in becoming like a huge hub, is probably the weather. Like you young people want, pretty good public services, safe place to live, lots of opportunity, and sunny weather. And sunny weather, we fall down. Yeah. So I think that's actually one of the things we have to get over. I'm sure we can do it. Positives are the sales capabilities and our ability to access the US. We don't have the other skill sets in place yet. I'm sure we'll get it though.
But back to that underperforming piece, right? I'm still not satisfied.
Sure.
What else should we do? Like, obviously, we can't change the weather, right? We can't, but when you're comparing some of those Scandinavian countries and Israel, like, what tangible things could we do better?
So the great thing is, it's the same thing that everybody wants anyway, even if they're not entrepreneurs or they're not working at startups. Reasonable rent, reasonable taxes, safe place to live, good nightlife. What does the average person in their 20s and early 30s want in a city? If you give them that, that's what startups and entrepreneurs want too.
Just need to build more houses and then get the metro from there.
Housing is everything. Housing is everything, yeah. Yeah. It's all capital gains as well, but housing is big.
Taxes. I was chatting to a few people, and there's obviously different lobbying and trying to make it a little bit different, right? For entrepreneurs and to keep a bit of welfare and keep a bit of, just make it attractive in comparison to some other places. Do you have any views on Ireland as a place to, create wealth as an entrepreneur?
It's harder than, it's funny when I talk to people who are joining Wayflyer and they're not based in Ireland, they think Ireland is a really low tax country. I'm like, it's a low income tax perspective. No, they just think, it's a low tax country. They assume because our corporation tax is so low and famously low, they assume that all our taxes are low, like it's Singapore, and that is not the case. So I think I think the tax on options in particular is egregious, because normally when you're in a startup, you're giving somebody options because you can't pay them salary. So you're giving them outsized number of options. You're asking them to take risk. If they come on board, they take risk. You generate wealth. You pay VAT. You pay income tax. You pay corporation tax. You hire lots of people. It's great for the economy. And the tax on options is really high. It's a combination of income tax and capital gains, and it tends to be higher than in other countries. So the thing that I would think about changing would be how we treat options. I worry about the founders less. Founders tend to get shares in a company, so the founders are okay from a tax perspective. It's actually the early employees who take lots of risk and who end up with options. That structure isn't properly done right now for the tax. I think the early employees actually they're treated a bit more unfairly compared to the founders. The founders are fine. The early employees, they have a difficult tax situation with options.
Okay. I'm going to yo-yo again. Sorry. That's totally fine, but I still want to ask a few more questions. The entrepreneurial flair and that you kind of gravitated towards and, you know, clearly it's in you, right? And even the way you speak about being the CEO and 2 days of, you know, again, you obviously love it, and I can see it in your eyes. But like, where did that actually come from? Like, when you look back and just analyze your own story, and like, you know, I don't want to get all too fluffy about it, but you know what I mean? Like, it is kind of curious to know how, because a lot of people, you know, they can be inspired by the people around them or the parents or, you know, like different role models around them, but sometimes people just come out of nowhere and just obviously for entrepreneurial.
I think I was doing, when I was doing the MBA, and even in organizations I'd worked in previously, I would have been like, I'm sure I could run that better, or why are they doing this, not doing this the right way? Definitely from a position of ignorance and arrogance. But one of the main challenges for me was actually, I'd love to build an organization that I would want to work in, like that would embody the values that I would actually have. And that was actually a big motivator for me. So in addition to, I'm very interested in finding gaps in the market, I'm interested in testing new products, I'm interested in building, I get a real high out of building. But a big part of it actually was, I'd like to run an organization the way I want to run it, rather than like, you know, climbing the pole up within another organization. So I think there was probably an element of independence that I always had that definitely reflected itself in entrepreneurship. But once I started, like, I think within like 3 months, I said, I never want to do anything else. Like, I knew it straight away.
Wow. And you're only 40?
No, I'm only 40. I don't know what you mean only, but...
Hey. Is there something that you believe in, you personally believe in, that others actually don't believe? Like, did you come across, like, do you come against...
Yeah, it's the usual Peter Thiel question, what's the one thing you believe that most people don't?
Yeah, there you go, yeah. Totally robbed it.
So most of the time when you're in an organization, my employees will laugh when they hear this. I would actually say it's better to be wrong than boring.
Okay.
So when we're communicating, being in a written document or we're giving a Zoom call, if you're boring, you score 0. And most of us are pretty boring. We don't dwell on a long document. We put together crappy PowerPoints. You know, we just don't put in the time. And as a result, we're boring. And I think a lot of the time when you're communicating, you either have somebody's attention or you don't. It's very binary. And we should all put way more time into making sure that we are not boring. And I don't mean that in a small way. I mean that in a big way. Like, if you're boring, if you're not, like, if what you're saying is factually correct and it's very accurate, but it's really turgid and you've badly structured sentences, tough, you get a 0. So if you're wrong and you're entertaining, someone's going to react to it and you're going to have a conversation and it's probably going to get better. But like, better to be wrong than boring, because boring just scores you a 0. And I think that a lot of wasted work, ton of wasted work happens because we're just boring.
Is there anything more we should do in the education system, do you believe? Because if we look at that and the grounding, you know, the building blocks of that, and when you talk about, I don't know, still, maybe it's just my opinion, but I think secondary and even primary, it's still quite structured. It hasn't really evolved that much, right?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I've been out of it a while. So as kids grow older, I'll probably be able to see that. But I don't know, to be totally honest with you, because I haven't had access to the school system for 25 years.
Yeah, maybe I'm experiencing it at the moment. I was just curious to see if you had any thoughts, because again, you know, sometimes education, like that awareness, that entrepreneurship, and, you know, instilling those kind of seeds of ambition early sometimes can probably...
Yeah, we don't want everybody to be an entrepreneur either. Like, you know, if you're an amazing musician, it'd be great if you're a musician. If you're Cillian Murphy, it's great that you found acting. So
yeah,
we don't need everyone to be an entrepreneur either.
So the future for you then, very much on it, like a carb on it with Wayflyer.
This is the last job.
On.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Aidan, thanks for being so generous with your time.
Not at all. Great to be here.
And nothing but success and good vibes from us to you. That's right, my man.
Thanks, Neil.
Cheers, bud.
Cheers.